The wind carried a restless whisper across the empty dirt road, lifting grains of sand as if the land itself wanted to hide the young mother sitting alone beside the wire fence. Her dress clung to her knees, torn from hours of walking, and her breath trembled each time she looked down at the tiny child she held close to her chest. She tried to steady her voice, but even the smallest sounds seemed to echo across the wide desert plain. No wagon waited for her. No husband rode back for her. She had been left where the sun burned strongest, and the road felt endless. Her child, little and warm in her arms, shifted as if sensing her fear. She brushed her thumb over the baby's small cheek, whispering a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. She had been raised to believe the land had a spirit of its own, but today it felt empty. Not a bird called overhead. Not a rider passed. She wondered how far she could walk with no food or water left, how long her strength would hold, and whether the road would swallow her before she reached another town. Then the ground shook beneath her, slow at first, then steady. A horse's steps carried through the dirt like a heartbeat. The young mother stiffened, pulling her child tighter as she lifted her head. From the far end of the long fenced path, a rider appeared. His horse was strong and dark, its muscles shifting clean under the sun, and the man who guided it looked carved from the same wild land stretching across the horizon. The Apache warrior rode with a calm control, his gaze sharp, his back straight, as if danger followed him everywhere, and he had learned never to turn away from it. His braided hair hung past his shoulders, catching the sun. His arms looked powerful enough to break a fence post, yet the way he slowed his horse told her he knew how to handle strength with care. He studied her with eyes that held stories older than the towns scattered across the territory. She had heard tales about Apache men since she was a child. Some people spoke their name with fear, others with respect. But seeing him now, watching how he took in her state, she sensed no cruelty in him. Still, she stayed silent, unsure if she should run or trust that he had come with no harm. He stopped before her, the horse's hooves pressing deep marks into the ground. The warrior leaned forward slightly, just enough to show he had noticed every detail. Her torn dress, her shaking hands, the dirt on her feet, the baby who clung to her as if she was the only safe thing left in the world. "You should not be out here alone," he said, his voice steady and low. It carried the strength of someone who had crossed many harsh miles and survived each one. She swallowed hard. "I didn't choose it," she answered, her voice rough from dust and worry. "I was left here." He glanced down the road behind her, as if measuring how long she had walked and who had betrayed her. By letting her wander in a place that could break the toughest man, his jaw tightened. He did not ask why. Sometimes the truth could be seen without a single question. The baby whimpered and the warrior's eyes softened. He reached a hand toward her, slow and patient, letting her see that he meant no harm. His palm was scarred from work and battle, but the movement carried surprising gentleness. "Do not fear," he said. "I ride this land often. I saw you from the ridge. A woman with a child on this road does not belong to the heat or the fear that waits in the desert." She hesitated, then allowed her trembling fingers to touch his hand. Warmth spread through her, a strange sense of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. The warrior breathed deep. As if making a decision, he had been carrying 4 more miles than she would ever know. He dismounted and stood before her, tall and strong enough to face any threat, yet gentle enough to lower himself to speak at her eye level. His shadow fell over her, shielding her from the sun. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Raina," she answered, holding her child a little higher. "And this is my boy," he nodded, honoring both of them with a respectful bow of his head. "I am Kale." The name suited him. It carried the weight of a man who had fought for everything he had and had given pieces of himself to protect what mattered. Kale studied the fence stretching into the distance. It's the long abandoned path. The dust on her dress, the worry in her face. When he looked back at her, something firm settled in his eyes. A decision, a promise, a vow forming without hesitation. "You cannot go on like this," he said. "A woman alone with a child in this land is prey to hunger, storms, and men with no honor." Her throat tightened at his words. She knew he was right. She had lived with fear long before this day, maybe long before she knew what freedom felt like. Kale stepped closer. I offer you something different, something stronger than the road you were left on. Her heart pounded. She felt the desert hush around them, as if even the wind waited to hear what he would say. He looked at her child, then back to her. His voice grew firmer, carrying a promise that reached into the deepest place of her fear. Marry me and I'll protect you and your children. Raina froze. The words hit her harder than the sun, harder than the betrayal that had left her stranded. Marriage had once been a cage for her, not a shelter. She didn't know this man. She didn't know his world. She didn't know if she could trust a warrior she had met on a dusty road when her life had just fallen apart. But she also saw no deceit in him. His stance was strong, not demanding. His offer was not coded in charm. It came from a man who had carried burdens she could only guess at. A man who knew the harsh truth of survival and stood ready to face danger without stepping back. Kale waited without pressing her. The desert around them stilled again. The only sound was the soft breathing of her child and the low breath of his horse. She felt the weight of his words settle on her chest. Marriage to an Apache warrior. Protection for her boy. A chance to live instead of just survive. But also a step into a life she didn't yet understand. Her lips parted, but no answer came. Fear tangled with hope. Strength pushed against doubt. Every part of her wrestled with the choice sitting before her. Kale extended his hand again, not to force, but to offer. You choose your path, Raina, but choose before the sun falls. This land does not spare the unprotected. The sky above them darkened slightly, clouds gathering in the far distance. The wind picked up, swirling dust around her feet. She knew the day was changing, and so was her fate. She looked at Kale's hand, strong and willing. Then down at her child, whose future rested entirely on the decision she would make at this very moment. She took a breath, and before she could speak her answer, a distant shout carried across the road, stopping her heart cold. Someone else was coming, and whoever they were, they did not sound friendly. The shout rolled across the long road like a warning carried by the wind. Raina jolted, holding her child tighter against her chest. Kale turned his head sharply toward the sound, every line of his body shifting from calm strength to guarded readiness. His hand moved to the rope at his saddle, and his horse flicked its ears, sensing the tension. The echo grew clearer. More than one voice, more than one set of feet kicking up dust behind the wire fence line. Raina's breath caught as the fear she thought she had run from returned. Crawling up her spine and chilling her skin even under the heat, Kale stepped slightly in front of her, shielding her with the ease of a man who had done this for many before her. But this time, she sensed something different. He wasn't acting as a stranger. His stance carried the weight of a protector. Even though she still hadn't spoken her answer, "Stay close," he said, his tone low but steady. She didn't argue. The dust lifted from the far curve of the road, forming a cloud that warned of riders or men on foot. The voices grew louder, rough, angry, picking up pace. Raina felt her heartbeat quicken, each sound pulling her deeper into the memory she had been running from. Kale knelt beside her for a moment, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Tell me who might be following," Raina swallowed, unsure of how much to confess. She had been abandoned on this road, but that didn't mean everyone who left her wanted her dead. Or maybe they did. She had lived long enough under a roof where power came from cruelty, not kindness. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I know the sound of men who mean harm. I have heard it too many times." Kale nodded once. "Then we move." Before she could rise, he placed one arm under her and helped her stand while she cradled her child. His horse stepped closer, lowering its head as if understanding what needed to happen. "We'll ride for a short distance," Kale said, "just until I know who these men are." Raina hesitated, fear and doubt tugging at her. She had just met this warrior, barely knew his world, yet she felt safer with him than she ever had in the past years of her life. She let him lift her onto the horse, seated behind the saddle where she could hold her child steady. Kale mounted in front of her with practiced grace. The warmth of his back calmed her more than she expected. She gripped her baby tight with one arm and held the horse with the other as they moved down the road, The sound behind them grew closer. It's not yet near, but close enough to keep Cale's shoulders tense. Reyna felt every muscle in him shift as he directed the horse forward, scanning the land around them. Fences ran straight along both sides of the road, tall and endless, turning the dirt path into a narrow corridor. There was nowhere to hide, no turn to slip into. Whoever was coming would see them easily. After a long stretch of riding, Cale slowed the horse and turned slightly, just enough to glance back. The dust cloud behind them had grown thick. Shapes began to form within it. Reyna's stomach twisted. She prayed they were travelers who meant no harm. But her heart told her otherwise. Cale guided the horse toward a break in the fence where some posts hung loose. His breath steadied as he considered their options. Reyna watched his face, trying to read the things he didn't speak. She wondered what trouble he carried with him, what battles he left behind, and what history shaped the warrior who now made decisions that could shape her fate. Those men, Cale finally said, they are not strangers to this land. They know these fences and these paths. They ride with purpose. Are they after you? She asked in a shaky voice. He did not answer right away. His silence spoke louder than any word. Finally, he said, I have crossed paths with men who take what is not theirs. Men who look at a woman or a child and see weakness. I have stood against them. And they remember. Reyna felt a chill. She had seen men like that. Lived under their rule, fled from their anger. But Cale was different. He wasn't someone who ran. He wasn't someone who bowed. And that frightened her as much as it comforted her. For the first time. She realized the man who made her a promise on the road might be a target himself. Cale guided the horse through the broken section of fence. The open plains stretched on the other side, wilder and untouched, covered in dry brush and scattered sage. He rode into it without hesitation, letting the horse blend into the land where tracks disappeared faster. The sun dimmed behind a cloud, giving them a moment of shade. How far were you walking before I found you? He asked. Reyna forced herself to push back the rising fear to answer him. Since early morning, my boy was crying. My feet were bleeding. The wagon left before dawn. Who left you? He asked quietly. The question dug at old wounds she wasn't ready to expose, but she answered anyway. A man I once thought I could trust. A man who used his voice to command and his hands to punish. He didn't want a crying child on his wagon. He said I slowed him down. Cale's jaw clenched. Reyna saw anger rise in him, not wild or reckless, but controlled, heavy, the kind that grows from witnessing too much injustice. His voice dropped into a lower tone. You and your child deserve better. She looked down at her boy who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. I know, but I don't know if I can trust another man. Not so soon. Cale rode in silence for a long stretch. The land around them breathed slow, and the only sound was the steady beat of the horse's hooves against the ground. When he finally spoke, it was with a quiet honesty that made her chest tighten. I do not ask for your trust yet. I only ask for your choice. I cannot protect you unless you stand beside me, not behind me. Beside me. His words carried weight she didn't know how to hold. She had never stood beside any man before. She had only stood under them. Cale was offering something she had never experienced. Not safety, not shelter, but a chance at equality. Something rare in this harsh land. The horizon darkened, signaling an approaching windstorm. Brush swayed as gusts picked up. Sand danced in restless circles around the horse's legs. The sound of the riders behind them faded slightly. But Cale didn't ease his guard. He guided them toward a sheltered patch between two rocky outcrops. Here, the air calmed enough for Reyna to breathe. Cale dismounted, but kept his posture alert. He offered her a hand down, steadying her as she stepped carefully to protect her child. You need water, he said. And rest. She nodded. Her legs trembled from exhaustion. Cale handed her a small water skin from his saddle. Reyna drank in slow sips so she wouldn't overwhelm her stomach. The cool water soothed her throat and steadied her nerves. Cale stood near the horse. Eyes narrowed toward the road they had left behind. Those men will not stop easily, he said. Not when they think they have something to claim, Reyna shivered. What do they want? Different things, Kale answered. Some want control. Some want revenge. Some want to show their strength by hurting the weak. But a woman with a child alone on a road makes all of them ride faster. Raina felt sick. Fear pressed against her ribs. Will they find us? Kale turned his face toward her. Not before I am ready. She didn't know if that meant he planned to talk, fight, or flee. She didn't know his full story, his tribe's troubles, or the enemies he had gained over the years. But she sensed he was no stranger to danger. She sensed he carried a past thick with battles and losses he never spoke aloud. As the wind eased, Kale approached her and knelt to the level of her child. He gently placed a hand near the boy's small back, not touching him, but close enough that the quiet warmth of his presence felt protective. You say you feared trusting another man, Kale said, his voice low. Yet you hold yourself strong even when the world tries to break you. That is not weakness, Raina. That is courage. She wasn't used to being spoken to with respect. Not like this. Not by a man who could crush a cedar branch in his hand, but chose instead to speak softly to her trembling heart. Before she could respond, the distant thunder of hooves returned. Raina's head snapped up. Kale rose slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. The dust cloud had reappeared. Larger, closer, moving fast. They found our trail, Kale said. Raina felt her knees weaken. Her breath quickened. Kale stepped forward, placing himself between her and the approaching danger once again. His voice carried steady power. Stay behind the rocks. Do not move unless I tell you. Raina clutched her child, her breath unsteady, her heart pounding hard enough to shake her ribs. She watched Kale stand tall in the open, waiting for the riders to close the distance. The storm was coming. The riders were coming, and the decision she had not yet made hung heavy in the air. Ready to shape everything that followed, Kale lifted his chin, eyes narrowing as shadows appeared through the dust. She didn't know who those men were, but Kale did, and as one of the riders raised a rifle, Raina sensed that whatever came next would change her life forever. The riders burst through the rolling cloud of dust, their horses pounding the ground in a hard rhythm that carried straight into Raina's chest. She held her child close and crouched behind the outcrop, just as Kale told her. Her breath felt thin. She couldn't see the men clearly from where she hid, but she could hear the rough voices, the shouts, the sound of reins snapping, and the heavy breathing of horses pushed to their limit. Kale stood in the open, calm but alert, his stance strong enough to face a storm. The wind tugged at his braids, and the horse behind him pawed at the ground, waiting for a command. Raina watched him through the gap in the rocks, her fingers tightening around her child. She had only just met this warrior, yet she felt the weight of his fate pressing against her own. The first rider pulled ahead of the others. His coat hung loose, his hat low, and the rifle across his lap glinted in the fading sun. He stopped several yards from Kale and squared his shoulders. The rest of the riders formed a half circle behind him, dust settling around their boots. You again, the lead man growled. Kale didn't flinch. You're far from your camp. Not far enough, the man said. We saw you take the woman. You know she's not yours. Raina froze. Her heart hammered as she pressed her child to her chest. She didn't know this man's face, but she knew the tone. It was the same tone that had lived in the voices of men who believed they owned everything around them. She felt fear surge again. But this time, something hotter simmered beneath it. Anger. She had been taken, forced, broken enough times. She wouldn't go willingly again. Kale took a single step forward. She belongs to no man. Then hand her over, the rider snapped. She was seen on the main road. That makes her open claim. She's a mother, Kale said, his voice firm, and she is under my protection. A ripple of dark laughter moved through the group of men. Raina pressed her back harder into the cold stone, wishing she could grow wings and rise above all of it. The leader nudged his horse a little closer. You think you can stand against all of us? The man said. One warrior without a tribe to back him. Kale's jaw tightened. Raina saw the shift in his shoulders, not of fear, but of memory. Something in his past had carved that strength into him. Something had taught him what it meant to face many and still not back down. "She is not yours," Cale repeated. The rider lifted his rifle slightly, just enough to show he could aim if he wished. But he didn't fire, not yet. Instead, he watched Cale with a smirk that carried too much confidence. "Tell me this," the man said. "Why protect a woman you just found? Why risk a fight for someone who isn't from your people?" Cale didn't turn his head toward Reyna's hiding place, but she felt the answer settle in the space between them. "Because she was abandoned on a road where no one should be left," Cale said. "And because her child deserves better than men like you." The leader's expression shifted, not to shame, but to irritation. His pride couldn't stand being challenged by a single man. "You want trouble?" he growled. "Fine, we ride back at sundown. You have until then to hand her over. After that, we don't ask politely," turned his horse sharply. Dust lifted as the riders retreated the way they came, fading into the distance with echoing hoofbeats. Cale didn't move until they were completely gone. Only then did he lower his shoulders slightly and walk toward the rocks. Reyna stepped out with her child, her legs shaking so hard she nearly stumbled. Cale caught her elbow to keep her upright. "You're safe for now," he said, "but they'll return." "Why do they want me?" she whispered. Cale looked down the road they had come from. "Some men chase power. Some chase weakness. And some chase unfinished fights. I've crossed paths with their leader before." "What did you do?" she asked. "What needed to be done?" he answered, though his tone carried a weight that hinted at a story far deeper than he allowed himself to tell. Reyna held her child and tried to steady her breath. She wasn't sure which part frightened her more, the men who wanted her, or the idea that Cale had a past filled with enemies who still tracked him across miles of wilderness. Cale led her deeper into the rocks, where a narrow path opened into a sheltered hollow, hidden from the view of the road. The ground was soft with old leaves, and the air felt cooler here, protected from the harsh wind. Reyna sat, her child nestled in her lap. Cale checked the surroundings with careful steps. "This place will shield us until night," he said. "We need rest and a plan." Reyna ran her hand over the baby's small head. "What plan is there?" "They said they'll take me." Cale knelt in front of her, his gaze steady. "Not while I breathe." His voice carried no boast, only truth. Yet she knew he alone could not stand against a whole band of riders. The fear crept back in, but Cale saw it and spoke with quiet strength. "There are places they won't follow, places where my people live. If we reach them, you and your child will be safe." Reyna looked down at her son, then back at the warrior in front of her. "Why help me? You don't know anything about me?" Cale rested one hand on his knee. "You don't owe me a past. Only the choice of what future you want." A soft breeze moved through the hollow. Reyna stared at him, remembering the offer he had made on the road. "Marry me, and I'll protect you and your children." She still hadn't answered. She wasn't sure she even knew how to answer such a vow after everything she had lived through. Before she could speak, a faint rustle rose from the far side of the rocks. Cale stiffened. His hand went instantly to the blade at his belt. Reyna held her breath, her heart pounding as she clutched her child close. A figure emerged, though smaller and moving with caution. It wasn't a rider. It wasn't one of the men from the road. It was a boy no older than 13. His clothing was dust-covered, and his hair hung in tangled strands across his forehead. He lifted his hands to show he held no weapon. "I'm not with them," the boy said, his voice shaking. "Please don't hurt me." Cale stepped between Reyna and the newcomer. "Who are you?" "My name is Rook," the boy said. "I came from the ranch near the ridge. Those men stopped there earlier. They took our horses. They threatened my father." Cale's jaw tightened. "Did they harm anyone?" "Not yet," Rook said. "But they said they're searching for a woman with a child. Father tried to slow them down, but they hit him and took what they wanted. I saw you riding away, so I followed. I needed to warn you." Reyna's stomach twisted. "Why warn us?" "You don't know me," Rook shook his head. "I know men like them. They destroy whatever they want, and they said they'd punish anyone who hides you." Cale's gaze grew darker. The conflict now spread beyond the road. Innocent ranchers could be harmed. A child had been sent running through the rocky paths because grown men couldn't hold their greed. "Where is your father now?" Cale asked. "At home," Rook said. "He told me to run if the riders came back. They're heading toward the ridge at sundown." Raina felt the walls closing in. Cale already had enemies coming for him. Now a ranch family lay in danger too, and she was the reason for all of it. "I should leave," she whispered. "I shouldn't put others at risk." Cale turned to her sharply. "No, you didn't create their cruelty. They would harm others, whether you stayed or ran. Don't blame yourself for their hunger for control." But Raina couldn't stop the guilt tightening in her chest. Her child squirmed gently in her arms, as if sensing her turmoil. Cale stood and looked toward the fading sun. "Sundown," he said. "They'll go after the ranch next." Rook stepped forward. "Can you help us? My father stood up for you even though he didn't know you. If those men return, he won't be able to fight them alone." Cale closed his eyes for a moment, torn between battles. Protecting Raina. Protecting a rancher he had never met. Protecting a land where justice often came at the end of a rope or a barrel. "We'll go," Cale finally said. "But we move carefully." Raina rose with her child, her legs still trembling. She looked at Cale, fear and gratitude blending inside her. "Will we make it in time?" Cale held her gaze. "I will do everything to ensure we do." The boy nodded eagerly and turned to lead them through a narrow passage between rocks. Cale placed a steadying hand on Raina's back as she followed. The tension tightened again, heavier, sharper. They were heading toward danger, not away from it. Raina didn't know what waited for them at the ranch. She didn't know if Cale's strength would be enough. She didn't know if those riders were part of a larger force or only the beginning of something worse. But she knew one thing with painful clarity. Whatever path she and her child walked now was tied to Cale's fate. And as the light faded and the wind picked up again, she felt it deep in her bones. The darkest part of their journey had only just begun. The path toward the ridge grew tighter as the sun dipped lower, painting long shadows across the land that stretched like dark hands reaching for their ankles. Raina held her child close and followed Rook through the narrow rock trail, her heart pounding with every echo of distant hooves she imagined behind them. Cale stayed close beside her, moving with the steady steps of a man who had walked into danger many times. But even she could sense that something in him had shifted. His jaw was tense, his eyes sharp, and every sound in the wind seemed to shape the plans forming in his mind. Rook hurried ahead, glancing back every few breaths. "The ranch is just beyond that rise," he said, pointing toward a ridge where the sky turned darker at the edges. "If we can get there before the riders circle back, Father might still be safe." Cale placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "We will make it," he said, though Raina could hear the pressure under his words. The riders had threatened to return at sundown. Sundown was slipping over the horizon fast. The wind kicked up dust as they reached the crest of the slope. Down below sat a small ranch house made from weather-worn planks, its roof slanted and the fences around it broken in places. Smoke rose from the chimney in thin wisps. A horse stood tethered outside, restless and stamping the ground. Raina felt a sharp pang of hope mixed with fear. The ranch looked peaceful, but peace often hid danger behind its quiet face. Cale surveyed the area with careful eyes. "Stay close behind me," he told Raina, "and keep the child quiet if you can." Raina nodded. Her son stirred softly, but did not cry. She kissed the top of his head and whispered a promise she prayed she could keep. The cold fear had wrapped itself tight around her chest. She didn't know if she feared for herself, for the rancher they were trying to save, or for Cale, who seemed ready to carry every burden alone. Rook ran ahead toward the small porch and pushed the door open. "Father," he shouted, "we're here." Cale motioned for Raina to stay behind him as he approached the doorway. Rook's father, a tall man with graying hair and a limp in one leg, appeared inside the dim room. His face lit up at the sight of his son, then quickly hardened when he saw Cale, not in anger, but in wary understanding. He knew trouble walked with the Apache warrior. "You brought them here," the father said quietly, though his voice held a note of courage beneath the exhaustion. Rook shook his head. I came to warn them. The riders said they'd return. We know, Cale said. And they're close. The father moved aside, letting them in. The small room felt warm, but heavy with worry. A lantern flickered on the table. Raina stepped in last, still clutching her child, feeling the weight of danger thick in the air. The father looked at her with gentle confusion. Are you the woman they're searching for? Raina lowered her eyes, guilt burning in her chest. I didn't mean to bring danger here. Didn't bring it, the man said. Men like them bring danger wherever they ride. Cale stepped forward. We'll defend your ranch, but we have little time. The father nodded toward the window. They took our horses. We only have one left, and it's not fast. They'll come from the east. The road is open on that side. Rook moved beside his father and placed a hand on his arm. We can help. Cale studied the door, the windows, the open field beyond. I need places to build cover. Loose wood, barrels, anything that blocks their view. The father pointed to the back shed. Use whatever you need. Cale turned to Raina. Stay inside with the child. Lock the door. Do not come out unless I call for you. Raina felt fear twist inside her again. Cale, you can't face all of them alone. There will be help, Cale said. But I need you safe. The riders want you. That gives them reason to push harder. She hated the truth in his voice, but she nodded. She had no weapons, no strength to fight. If she stepped outside, she would become a weakness the riders could use. She understood that, even if it hurt, as Cale and the rancher moved outside to set up defenses. Raina stayed near the window with her child, watching the sky deepen into a heavy blue. Rook sorted through supplies, handing Cale whatever he requested. The men moved with urgency. Barrels were dragged into place. Wooden planks were leaned against the porch to form a low shield. The single horse nickered nervously as if sensing the coming danger. Cale stood at the edge of the yard and looked toward the east. His shoulders squared, his breath steadied. Raina could tell he was listening for the riders. She watched him from inside, her hands trembling, her mind racing with worry. She had never known a man like him. He carried himself like someone who refused to break, even when the world tried to crush him. But he was still one man against many. Cale, the father said quietly, joining him at the edge of the yard. I don't know your story, but you must have angered those men in a way that won't fade. Cale did not look away from the horizon. Men who take from the weak fear only one thing. A man who refuses to bow could leave, the father said. Save yourself. Cale shook his head. I gave my word to her, and to the child. Inside, Raina pressed her hand against her heart. His words hit her with a force she wasn't ready for. A man giving his word, not for gain, not for control, but because he saw her worth. Because he saw her child's worth. It stirred something inside her, something she had forgotten she could feel. The father looked at Cale for a long moment. Then we stand with you. Cale nodded once. A bond formed in that moment, forged by necessity, but strengthened by shared courage. Rook ran to the fence. I see dust, he said, pointing with a shaking hand. Raina felt her stomach drop. The dust cloud grew larger by the second, rolling over the open land like a warning. Cale reached for his rope. He checked the knots, tightened the loop, and stepped forward. His eyes narrowed. His breath steadied. The riders were coming. Raina held her child closer, her heartbeat thundering. She didn't know what would happen, only that something inside her felt pulled toward Cale. She wanted to stand with him. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to scream for him to flee. But she could do none of those things. Her part in this moment was to hold her child, to protect the life that depended on her. The hooves grew louder. The earth trembled beneath the incoming force. The ranch father moved beside Cale, holding only a broken fence post, but gripping it with the determination of a man defending his home. Rook crouched near the porch, eyes wide, jaw tight, ready despite the fear shaking his limbs. Cale stepped forward into the open yard. His shadow long across the dirt, he looked like a man shaped by fire and wind. Born for moments exactly like this. Raina watched through the window, barely breathing. She whispered a silent plea. not sure whether it was for Kale, for herself, or for the child she held. The riders broke through the dust cloud. Their leader sat in front again, the rifle strapped across his back, his posture confident. His men rode behind him, forming a wide line meant to show their power. They slowed as they approached the ranch, their horses kicking up sharp bursts of dirt. Kale did not move. The lead rider smirked. "You think you can hide her here?" Kale's voice carried across the yard. "She is under my protection." "That offer you made her," the leader said. "Marry me, and I'll protect you and your children." Brave words from a man standing alone. Kale didn't blink. "I stand where I need to stand." The leader laughed and turned to his men. "Take the ranch. Search every room." Raina gasped softly and pressed herself against the inner wall as footsteps hit the ground outside. Kale's muscles tensed. Rook's father gripped his post harder. The boy ducked lower. Then the riders charged. Raina couldn't see everything from her window, but she saw enough. Kale moved with a speed she had never seen before, pulling the first rider from his horse with a force that shook the ground. Rook's father swung the fence post at another rider, knocking him back. Dust filled the air. Hooves thundered. Shouts echoed through the yard, but still more riders kept coming. Raina trembled, unable to look away. Her breath caught as one rider broke toward the house. He ran for the door. She backed up, gripping her child tightly as he rattled the handle and slammed his shoulder into it. Kale turned, saw the danger, and shouted her name. Raina's heart froze. Everything inside her tightened into one sharp, breathless moment. Kale was fighting as hard as one man could fight. But the riders were many, and the door behind her shuddered. Under the force of a man trying to break through, the climax of their fate was closing in. And Raina knew one truth with piercing clarity. If Kale fell, everything she loved would fall with him. The door shook again under the force of the rider's shoulder, each hit sending a sharp jolt through the small ranch house. Raina stepped back with her child pressed tightly to her chest, her breath trembling as the wood splintered. She whispered a soft promise into her son's hair, telling him she would protect him no matter what happened. The rider outside shouted for someone to bring fire or rope. The panic rose in her throat like smoke. Before he could slam into the door again, a heavy crash sounded from outside, followed by a grunt of pain. The shaking stopped. Raina dared to inch closer to the window. What she saw made her chest flood with relief. Kale had reached the porch. He had tackled the rider before the man could force his way in. Kale's strength was fierce but controlled, every movement sharp and purposeful. He pulled the rider away from the house and threw him into the dirt where he lay dazed. Raina hurried to lock the door again, her hands shaking. Outside, the chaos in the yard had shifted. Rook's father still stood his ground with the broken fence post. But now 2 riders were retreating, limping back to their horses. The dust cloud once thick with enemies was thinning. The stubbornness of the ranch family and the power of the Apache warrior had begun to turn the tide. Kale took a quick breath and glanced toward the door, making sure Raina and the child were still safe, but he didn't linger long. The leader of the riders had not retreated. He sat tall on his horse, fury boiling in his eyes as he watched his men fall back. "You should have handed her over," the leader snarled. "This land doesn't belong to you." Kale stepped forward, rope in hand, shoulders squared. "This land belongs to those who protect it, not those who steal from it." The leader pulled his rifle and aimed, but Kale moved before he could fire. With a swift throw, the rope looped through the air and caught the leader's arm, jerking him off balance. The rifle misfired into the dirt, sending a burst of dust into the air. Kale pulled hard, dragging the man from his horse. The leader fell with a heavy thud. The moment he hit the ground, silence washed through the yard. The other riders froze. Fear finally cut through the bravado in their eyes. They looked from Kale to their fallen leader, then to the rancher standing firm beside him, and to the desperate boy crouched with a rock in hand. Brave, despite his shaking limbs, the riders had lost their nerve. Kale stepped forward and lifted the leader by his coat collar. His expression calm but firm. "Leave this land," he said. "Do not return. You have taken what is not yours for too long." The leader glared but said nothing. Kale released him with a shove. The man scrambled to his horse as his riders followed. Within moments they climbed back into the dust cloud and rode off across the open land. Further and further away, until the only sound left was the soft rustle of wind across the grass. Raina let out a long breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She unlocked the door and stepped outside, her child still in her arms. The yard was scattered with churned dirt and knocked over barrels, but the danger was gone. The storm that had threatened her life, her baby's life, every life here had finally passed. Kale stood in the center of the yard, his breathing hard, shoulders rising and falling in a slow rhythm. His chest was scratched, his knuckles bruised, but he stood tall. Raina walked toward him, feeling her eyes sting. She stopped right in front of him, the warm weight of her baby against her chest. "You've saved us," she whispered. Kale shook his head lightly. "We all stood together. The rancher, the boy, you. I am not the only reason they ran." Rook's father limped over, leaning on the broken post. "We owe you much," he said. "If you ever need help, this land will remember you." Kale gave him a respectful nod. Rook stepped closer, looking up at Kale with wide eyes filled with admiration. "You fought like 10 men, the boy said. Kale placed a hand on his shoulder. "Courage grows in those who stand for what's right. You proved that today." Raina's child stirred gently, and Kale looked down at him with a softer gaze. The fierceness he carried melted into warmth. Raina watched the way he stood close without taking a step too far. The way he wore his strength without using it to force anything upon her. "Kale," Raina said quietly, "those riders were after me. You risked your life for someone you barely knew." Kale faced her fully. "I knew enough. You were alone on a road where no one should be left. A mother with a child deserves protection, not cruelty." Her lips trembled. She had never known a man who saw her as someone worthy of standing beside him. She had always known chains of fear, not bonds of respect. "You asked me something before," she said softly. Back on the road, Kale's expression shifted, his eyes holding steady as he waited for her words. He had not asked her again. He had given her space, given her choice, even while protecting her. That alone already answered the questions in her heart. Raina's chest tightened with emotion. The wind brushed against her face as she took a small step closer to him. "You asked me to marry you," she said. "To protect me and my children. I didn't answer before because my life was full of fear. I was afraid to trust anyone. But today, you showed me what a real man is. Someone who protects, not controls. Someone who stands with strength, not force." Kale's breath deepened, though he still said nothing. He was leaving the decision entirely with her. Raina lifted her child a little higher, the boy now awake and blinking softly in the fading light. She looked at her son, then back at Kale, her voice steady. "If the offer still stands," she said, "my answer is yes." A warmth spread across Kale's face, subtle but strong. He stepped forward carefully, placing a hand near the child and another on Raina's arm. Not pulling her, not claiming her, just holding her in a way that felt like peace. "It stands," he said, "and I will protect you both for as long as I have strength." Raina felt every wall inside her fall away. She leaned gently into his chest, her baby nestled between them. The ranch father smiled as he watched, and Rook let out a relieved breath. Brushing the dirt off his clothes, "You two deserve a quiet start," Rook's father said. "Stay here tonight. Rest. We'll fix the fences tomorrow." Kale nodded. "We will help you rebuild." Raina held Kale's hand as they walked toward the small ranch house. The door that once shook with danger now opened to calm light and shelter. Inside, they found warmth, food, and safety. Kale sat near the fire while Raina fed her child. He watched her with quiet respect, as though every movement she made was a reminder of the courage she had carried through the hardest days of her life. Later that night, when the stars filled the sky and the land was quiet again, Raina sat beside him. The crackling fire lit the room with a soft glow. Kale turned to her. "You do not have to fear anymore," he said gently. Raina rested her head on his shoulder. I believe that now. The land outside was calm. The riders were gone. The ranch stood strong. Rook and his father slept peacefully in the back room. And for the first time in a long time, Raina let herself breathe without worry, tightening her chest. Kale placed an arm around her, steady and warm. The baby slept softly in her lap. A new chapter had begun. Not forced, not taken, chosen. The night stretched quiet and safe around them, holding their future like a promise carved into the land. A future built on courage, a future built on hope, a future built on love they had both earned through fire and fear, and now held with gentle hands. Their story had traveled through danger and shadows, but it had found its way into the light, and here, together, their happy ending finally began.